The schedule is out, Big East Hoops fans. We're sure that you've been marking your calendars up, so thanks for joining us here again from New York City. I'm John Fanta with an extra dose of Big East Shootaround. We've got reaction from NCAA.com correspondent Andy Katz, as well as how the schedule is structured, how it gets made. They put together 150 drafts of this schedule before they came to the finished product, and Senior Associate Commissioner of Men's Basketball at the Big East, Stu Jackson, will also be joining me shortly. But we begin with some of the schedule highlights, and that starts with at least 18 Fox telecasts this upcoming season. Take a look at this slate. The month of December tips off with a really juicy non-conference doubleheader. Seton Hall hosting Chris Mack's Louisville Cardinals, and then Gonzaga will be a top 10 team in the preseason. They'll visit Creighton. But throughout this schedule, what stands out? Villanova at Providence early in conference play on Saturday, January 5th. Then Georgetown and St. John's on broadcast television twice. Early in January on CBS, that's also January 5th. And then the Johnnies welcoming the Hoyas at Madison Square Garden. That Sunday, January 27th game on Fox. And Seton Hall Villanova follows that game. So that last Sunday in January will be outstanding. Gotta love Marquette hosting Villanova. And the Golden Eagles, they are loaded on national TV. 5 Fox broadcast channel appearances for the Golden Eagles. That is definitely warranted, as their season is certainly hyped up. In terms of other highlights for me before we get to some more reaction, I would say that one big takeaway is, throughout all of your takeaways, keep in mind, everybody's got to go through 9 home, 9 road games. The double round robin schedule lends itself to being able to get revenge on a team or seeing a team again later in the season. There's certainly some quirky things like Butler and Providence facing each other in 2 of the final 3 games. But overall, it is obviously balanced. You're going to have to play 4 home games and then 5 road in one half of the conference slate. Everybody has to deal with those types of things on that march to Madison Square Garden. So, what does a national insider think of this? We go to the insider's insider, NCAA.com's Andy Katz. We now welcome in NCAA.com correspondent Andy Katz to get his breakdown of the Big East Hoops schedule. And Andy, what is your take on this conference and the slate heading into 2018-19?
Well, first of all, I think we have to look at Villanova as the favorite, even though Jay Wright on my latest podcast was tabbing Butler of all schools, a little bit of a surprise, as the potential favorite. But look, Villanova, even though they lost a ton off their championship team, they do have Phil Booth and Eric Pascal back. They've got a great recruiting class coming in, and there's so much belief and faith in the Villanova way. With that being said, last season you had 2 elite teams in Villanova and Xavier, potentially for 2 to get to the Final Four. Xavier gets upset, multiple number 1 seeds, but I don't think you're going to get that this season. Let me play the positive role here. I think we have as many good teams from 1 to 10 as the Big East has had in years. I think the fact that DePaul has gotten better, we're going to see a renaissance at St. John's. Georgetown wasn't necessarily down, like way down, but I think they're going to come back up. There's just not a bad team. And every road game is going to be a grind.
What are your favorite dates across this conference?
All right, I want to get into some stretches here in a moment, but let's deal with dates as you asked here. I'm going to look, first of all, January 5th. You've got Villanova at Providence. This is a Providence team that had a great trip to Italy. I think they're a little bit under the radar right now, which is kind of weird for an Ed Cooley team because they've been a consistent NCAA tournament team lately. David Duke played great as a freshman on that trip to Italy, got Alpha Diallo back. If they can upset Villanova at home, that sends a message to the Wildcats, and they've done it before. On that date as well, we got St. John's at Georgetown, and I really believe this is the year with Mullen and Ewing having teams that potentially could compete near the top. You got potential players of the year and Jesse Govan for Georgetown and Shamari Pons for St. John's. High-profile players on each one of these teams. I think that's going to be a great game to start to sort of, I know it's going to officially tip off the Big East, but it'll get people's attention at the beginning of the Big East. So January 5th is one of those dates. Do you want me to keep going, John, on some of my other dates?
We can dive in here going along, but you talked about
Okay.
key stretches, and I wanted to pinpoint on St. John's, Andy. This team, we're going to find out a lot about them and how for real they are. They start at Seton Hall, and then just a few days later have to turn around on Jan 1 after a December 29th conference opener, and they will host a nationally ranked, in all likelihood, a Marquette team that will be loaded. So that is a very interesting start for the Red Storm.
Yeah, no, St. John's has a great schedule, but also a schedule that's going to be challenging, as you mentioned. I mean, look, they all are, but for this Red Storm team, it was just a year ago when they lost 11 in a row before they upset Duke and Villanova. And so clearly for St. John's, it's so much going to be about the start for them to build confidence. And I think they'll get it. Hopefully they'll get it in the non-conference. But, the other games that jump out at me is for the Red Storm. Okay, they've got a stretch where in February, they're going to host Villanova on February 17th. That's part of a two-game stretch for Villanova, where Villanova goes at St. John's, at Georgetown. Brutal stretch for the Wildcats. They're going to host Butler on February 12th, and if we take Jay Wright at his word, that's potentially the conference favorite. So St. John's, look, they got to play everybody, but I'm just circling some dates, I think, for St. John's that will be those sort of high water marks where we say, okay, where is this team? You mentioned the beginning of the season. I want to see how they handle those home games in February, where they've got Butler on the 12th and Villanova on the 17th.
We talked about Butler earlier. Jay Wright loves this Butler team. They'll be powered by star point guard Kamar Baldwin. But how about how the Dogs finish up their conference schedule? At Villanova, home to Xavier. That's become a rivalry in this league. And then at Providence. That is a trio of games right there.
Well, and that could end up deciding the league or deciding certainly the seedings for the Big East tournament. Look, Laval Jordan's done an outstanding job in a brief time at Butler, continuing the Butler way. Barry Collier has not whiffed on his hires. If you want to make an argument that maybe Todd Licklager wasn't the most successful of the coaches there, but I still think he did a good job. And, clearly there's something in the water there because Butler gets it. Laval Jordan understands it, and they've got the pieces. They may not be a top 10 team, but they've got the experience within this league. And you mentioned that Xavier rivalry. I think that certainly could be a sleeper game because, as we've talked before, when I did my predictions, I didn't know where to put Xavier. And because, based on past success, you can't put them low. But they lost a lot. They lost a lot of key guys. And there's nothing against Travis Steele with a coaching change, but you have to give a little bit because you don't know. You have to wait and see how he does because Chris Mack was so successful. And there is a big, movement from one seat to the other. So, that could end up being a sneaky game, for Butler at the end of the season. That March 9th, by the way, I don't know if we've gotten there yet, but, that last day, is going to have so many, and I'm not stating the obvious here because it doesn't always happen where the last day of the regular season determines so much. But you're going to have Villanova at Seton Hall, Georgetown at Marquette, St. John Xavier, Butler Providence, as you just mentioned, and DePaul Creighton. I'm going to guarantee you, and someone would say, oh, maybe Captain Obvious here, but I just don't think we're going to know many of the seeds going into that March 9th date. I really think that could determine 1 through 10. I think it really could come down to that last day.
Andy Katz, thanks so much for giving us all your great insight. I think we could talk about this schedule for hours. Luckily, we've still got some more time before the season, but NCAA.com correspondent. March Madness 365 podcast with Jay Wright this week, right?
That's right. So Jay joined us on the podcast and talked about this season's team, the difference between winning, what happened in the offseason in 2016 versus 2018. So give a listen to the podcast at all our March Madness social media platforms. And John, I will see you at Big East Media Day next month at the Garden.
We'll see you there. Follow him at the Andy Katz on Twitter. Andy, thanks. A couple of additional storylines on top of what Andy brought up, and there were a number of great things, but keep an eye out for these things that are on my radar heading into this upcoming year. Number one, just the hype for St. John's. We'll find out a lot about them early with those games against Seton Hall, then 3 nights later at home against Marquette. That's huge. Providence, opening up with Creighton on New Year's Eve. The Friars are in for a much-anticipated season. They do have a tough number of tests in February. If you look at their schedule, at St. John's February 9th, then at Villanova. So that'll be really interesting to see how they handle that slate, the Friars do. And then I think about Butler as well as Marquette. Get this for Butler. I've got a whole number of papers here. And for Butler to finish up with, at Marquette, Providence, at Villanova, Xavier, and then at Providence. That's a tough stretch to finish up the schedule. But again, 9 home, 9 road. How does this schedule become a final product to be fair and balanced? Here is Senior Associate Commissioner of the Big East, Stu Jackson. And now we welcome in Senior Associate Commissioner of Men's Basketball here at the Big East. It's Stu Jackson. It's always a fun day to finally get that schedule. I know you've been working away. We had to put food and drink underneath your door just to keep you surviving, right?
It's a fun day when it's over, John. You know, it's been a long haul here the past month, you know, working with Mike Coyne and Brianna Weiss on our staff. You know, it's all in for about a month long, but finally it's over.
How do you guys go about laying all of this together for these 10 teams?
Well, we just kind of take a dart and throw it at the board and see what happens. No, but the reality is it's an actual, it's a long process because in the Big East it tends to be a little bit complex because we have to work a schedule, build a schedule around our building availabilities and still keep some competitive equity. And then also we need to make sure we're honoring Fox's requests. And then lastly, our schools have various requests throughout the season in terms of wanting special events on certain days, like Creighton's Pink Game, or certain schools want certain games on a weekend. So when you put all that together, the buildings, the competitive equity, TV, and special requests, it becomes quite a soup that we have to put together.
Folks, it's important to remember here, and I know that there's a lot of fans that always wonder, how does this all happen? It is not as if Stu just sends an email to each of the 10 coaches with the schedule. You are in dialogue with all 10 schools.
Yeah, we are, and it's not always pleasant dialogue, John, because, you know, as we work and build the schedule, there are certain outcomes when we input games into the system, and then ultimately the software produces a schedule that we review. This year we had 150 runs of the schedule before we actually got one that we were comfortable with. But after you're comfortable with the schedule, we want to give the teams a highlight of what the schedule may look like without the times on them, or the game times, so that they can assess, for themselves and analyze what their schedule looks like. Now, after that analysis, they're not always pleased. As a matter of fact, there's always something every school has that they're concerned about or would like to be changed. But it's good dialogue and friendly dialogue.
And you talked about the dialogue with Fox Sports as well. And there is the benefit for the Big East Conference now entering the 6th year. More games on broadcast television than any other college basketball conference. So what goes into that?
Well, no, Fox is great. As you know, they're a great television partner. And as part of the scheduling process, they have their own requests. This year, they had upwards to 20 requests for games, and probably 8 or 9 of those were must-have games that they had to have on the air at a certain time during the year. And those are requests we have to honor. But the net result is we end up with 19 games on Fox, on the national network, and then another 3 on CBS for a total of 22 nationally broadcast games. There's no other conference in the country that can make that claim for that level of exposure during the college basketball season.
What say you about this upcoming year in this conference?
Well, 2 things. One is our conference this year is going to be a conference of parity. I wouldn't be surprised when the preseason polls come out that Villanova once again is designated as, the top team in the conference. But I don't think even Villanova thinks that they're going to go through this Big East season maybe quite as easily as they did with 3 and 4 losses during the previous 2 seasons. So it's a conference of parity. But the thing, my point about our conference this year, yes, we lost a lot in terms of recognizable talent, but we've replenished it with very high-level talented, with names that are yet to be known. And I think that our conference is as talented as any in the country. This year it's going to be younger, but that bodes well for the future because we're going to get to a point where these 2 classes of last year and this year are eventually going to be juniors and seniors, and we're going to have, I think, a top-tier conference for many years to come.
How do the buys work?
That's interesting. I mean, the buys are, listen, every team is going to get at least 2 buys within their conference schedule. In a perfect world, you want to make sure those buys, which we look at as rest days for a team, you want to have them spaced evenly. It doesn't always work out that way. And this year we have some teams that actually have 3 buys during the conference season. And there's 2 schools of thoughts. One is their rest days, but then if you have 3 buys, or even when you have 2 buys, some teams look at it as, maybe you're breaking our rhythm because we're on a roll. So, but every team gets 2. It's really a function of how the schedule falls out as a result of the software, and then we go with it.
Stu Jackson, nobody better than you, and we even upgraded you to the lounge chair.
Yeah, John, one of these days I'm going to do an interview here, and I'm actually going to be on that couch. I've seen some of your really high-level guests. They get the couch. I used to get the director chair. Now I get this more comfortable chair, which I appreciate, but I want to get to the top. I want to get to the pinnacle and do an interview with you on the special couch.
You're rising.
Yeah, that's all I ask for is improvement.
You can go to BigEast.com for the complete schedule. It is in a PDF file form. I know all of you want to put it on your calendars, so go to BigEast.com. The entire schedule with TV info, tip times is all there. Thanks to Andy Katz and Stu Jackson for hopping on, and stay tuned to @BigEastMBB on Twitter. I'm at John_Fanta, as we've got plenty of Big East Hoops preseason content coming your way. Freshman Fundamentals is this weekend. The newest faces in the Big East, you're going to see some content on them this weekend. Plus, next week on the show, it is the Butler star leading the Dogs into year 2 of the LaVall Jordan era. It is point guard Kamar Baldwin who will join me from Indy. Thanks for tuning in to Shootaround. Hope you're enjoying your schedule and planning out your trips for the season. And we will see you next week back at our original time, 1 Eastern, on the Fox Sports app and at Big East. Have a good weekend, everybody.